Well, today is the fourth Sunday of the season of Lent, and it also is the fourth installment of the sermon series that we've been working on for the past several weeks, a sermon series entitled Rescue Me. Every single person that's sitting here today, every single person has had at least one or maybe more times in your life where you have felt lost and overwhelmed or maybe even abandoned by God. And maybe for some of you, those feelings that you had started a struggle, maybe some questions that came up, and maybe you're still struggling today trying to understand what you believe about God and what it looks like to follow Jesus. And maybe you're sitting here today and you're asking some questions, or you've got a prayer that you've continued to pray. You know, that maybe there was a time in your life where you prayed that prayer hoping that you would get a response. Most of us have had that happen to us, and it feels sometimes when we're in the midst of our trials and tribulations, when we're experiencing hardship and heartache, that those prayers, those questions that we have, they feel a little bit like you're taking a message and shoving it into a bottle and throwing it into the ocean, hoping beyond hope that there's going to be an answer, that somebody will find it and respond. And that's been the overriding image of this particular Lenten sermon series that we've been working through, the idea of a message in a bottle, throwing our questions out into the universe, hoping that God will hear, that God will respond to us. And as we stumble on the beach, sometimes what we discover is that those messages from God, those responses, they come right in the moment when we need them. Maybe not when we wanted them, but when we need them. At the beginning of this sermon series, I shared with y'all that the oldest discovered message in a bottle at that time was about 108 years old. And as many of you messaged me this week, which is so awesome when people are, I'm like, they were listening to my sermons. You messaged me and said, check out this news story that there was a new message in a bottle that was found that was 135 years old or something like that. And I was thinking to myself this week, like that message floating around in the ocean for 135 years until just the right moment and just the right time for it to be discovered on that beach and found when it needed to be found, right? And so many times that's what it's like for us when we're seeking that message from God, that God's timing is not our timing. And we stumble sometimes upon those messages when we're ready to hear them, when we are able to finally have our eyes open and our ears unstuck to be able to experience what God is sending to us. And so each week we've been talking about these messages in a bottle that are coming to us from the Psalms, the lectionary Psalms, the Psalms that are read during the Sundays of the season of Lent. And today our Psalm that we're going to be taking a look at is Psalm 107. And we're going to be getting a message from it here in a moment. But before that, we need to ask a question. It's kind of our bottle message, right, that we're casting out there. Our question that we need to answer, we need to struggle with, and one that maybe many of you have asked as well. And that question is this: what does it mean to be saved? What does it mean to be saved? Now, lots of Christians use that term to describe their particular state, right? They'll say that I am saved, or I got saved when I was 13, or I've been saved for 25 years. And typically what they're meaning is that they're a Christian, right? So they are saved and therefore they're Christian. And so they'll refer to people who are Christians as people who are saved. And people who aren't Christians, they refer to them as people who are unsaved. Now, for many Christian traditions, in fact, the sort of dominant cultural Christianity that surrounds us in so many ways, for so many of those traditions, getting saved is the point. I mean, that's the thing, right? So everything that they do is about helping people get saved. So at the end of every worship service, at the end of every funeral, wedding, potluck, whatever, right? There's some kind of invitation, and in some cases, when I was growing up, and some of y'all remember this, boy, you'd have like 45 stanzas of Just As I Am or I Surrender All until finally somebody went and took one for the team and ended it mercifully. I remember this as a high schooler. I was sitting all the way in the back, and this was not part of my original sermons. I'm giving you a freebie. All right, so I was sitting all the way in the back, and the invitation was going on forever on a Sunday night, and the pastor was like, just wanting a hand, any hand, and there were no hands that night. And finally, he said, "I see that hand." And I was back in the back, and I saw no one raise their hand. So I'm thinking what he did was he looked at his own hand so he didn't lie. He's like, "I see that hand," and then just ended it, that was the end of it. But that's the point, right? Getting saved. And sometimes in some traditions, it's all about knowing the exact point in time in your life when you prayed a prayer or did a thing and you got saved, and you can remember that. And you have to know the exact time, and you have to know the story. Otherwise, you may not be saved. In fact, I had a colleague one time that told me how in his church, he was a pastor in a church where that was their tradition, that was their thing. And his wife, who had not been raised in that tradition, could not remember a time in her life where she had gotten saved, where she had done whatever, had prayed a prayer. She'd always been a part of a church. She'd been raised in a Christian home, and she always followed Jesus. And the elders in his church were questioning her salvation, questioning the fact that she was a Christian because she couldn't remember a time when she did that. And he told me, "This is crazy because she's a better Christian than any of those jokers," right? But it was all about getting saved, right? And so we use that term. A lot of Christians will use that term and may not fully understand exactly what they're saying. Because the question that you tend to ask after that is, okay, you're saved from what, right? And so for many Christians, it's, I'm saved from hell. I'm saved from going to hell when I die. I'm saved so that I don't have to go to hell and I'm going to spend eternity in heaven. That's what it means, essentially, when most Christians will say that I've been saved. But what if I told you that it's bigger than that? What if I told you that salvation is bigger than that? Because every time you go to the Bible and you see the word or the idea of salvation, it's connected to rescue. It's connected to being rescued. And the word rescue so often in Scripture is identified with the word redemption. So you could make a simple equation like the one that you may see in your sermon notes, that being saved equals rescue equals redemption. So what is redemption? When we're talking about redemption, what are we talking about? Well, the definition, or one of the definitions in the Merriam-Webster dictionary online, I know because I checked, all right, one of the definitions is the act of being saved or the act of saving from sin. Now, all of a sudden, we're in the weeds, right? Because when we start talking about sin, what are we talking about exactly? Because Christians seem to differ over the idea of what is sin and what isn't. There are some Christian tribes that will believe something is a sin and other Christian tribes that don't. There are some Christian tribes that believe that drinking alcohol is a sin, and other Christian tribes that don't believe that that's a sin at all, if done in moderation. There are some Christian tribes that believe it's a sin to have women in leadership. And there are other Christian tribes, like ours, who believe that that's a virtue. Can I get a witness? So obviously, we have different ideas about what sin is. So what does the Bible say that sin is? In the Greek, the word sin, most often as it's used in the New Testament, is the word hamartia. Hamartia is a word that comes from archery, from the language of archery, which means to miss the mark. So basically, you're pulling back your bow and you're shooting, and you don't even make it, like most of the time when I try to do that, you don't even hit the target. You're falling short. The Apostle Paul, who wrote like half of the New Testament, he wrote a letter to some Christians in Rome, and he said in that, for all of us, it doesn't matter who you are, all of us have missed the mark. We've all fallen short of the glory of God. He didn't say that to make everybody feel bad. He didn't make that to make you feel guilty and shamed. He didn't make that say that so that you would be afraid. He was stating a fact. I mean, this is a fact. All of us, have fallen short of being the people that God dreams for us to be. Every single one of us, every day of our lives, falls short of fulfilling our destiny, of being the kind of people who live into the abundant life that Jesus has for us. So we've all fallen short. We've all missed the mark. That's what sin is, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about. And what does it look like when we do that on a daily basis? Well, it basically comes down to two things. It's when your relationship with God is strained and when you're alienated from others. Jesus said that the greatest commandment was to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And he said the second is like it, right? So he was saying these are very important, to love your neighbor as yourself. At this church, we say love God and love everybody. That's essentially what Jesus was talking about. But when you're sinning, right, when you're falling short of being the person that God has dreamed for you to be, your relationship with God is strained. And as a result of that, you are alienated in so many ways from other people because we show our love for God in the way that we love everyone. And when we love other people, we demonstrate our closeness in our relationship with God. And so when those things are strained, it can result in all kinds of problems. It can result in us having a failure to love people and love others just for the sake of loving. We come to it with an agenda. It can cause us sometimes to have a failure to grow as people, to progress, to move from where we are to where God wants us to be. And so this is what it means when we talk about being redeemed. We are redeemed. We are rescued from that. We are redeemed from falling short all of the time, that God finally, will say to us, are you listening now, right? Because I've been reaching out to you all along, and finally you're starting to listen to me. Finally, you're starting to get this, that this is not something that happened, although something happened. It's about what's happening as well. One of my favorite preachers and authors, Nadia Bolz-Weber, when asked the question, when did you get saved? She answers it one of two ways. The first way that she answers it is 2,000 years ago. So 2,000 years ago, God took on human form, became one of us in order to rescue all of us. The Apostle Paul said that Jesus, the second person of the Trinity, Jesus, the eternal Logos, the creative word of God, as it said in the first chapter of John, became a servant, became one of us, took on the worst that the world had to offer, was crucified, died, and was buried. And as Christians believe, he rose again from the dead in order to defeat sin and death so that we don't have to be afraid of it anymore. That's what happened. Amen? Come on, you can get a little bit excited. We're Presbyterians. But we're not dead, right? We're not dead yet. The second way that Nadia answers that question is this way. When somebody says, when did you get saved? She will sometimes say, this morning. Because we are constantly, even though we know what has happened, we still struggle sometimes to live into the hope of that. We still struggle to be resurrection people and to live into that hope of abundance of life that Jesus offered to us. I mean, we still struggle with it, and we need to be rescued once in a while because we get ourselves into some pretty bad scrapes. And so it's something that's happened, but it's also something that's happening. You have been redeemed, and you are being redeemed. That's what it means to be saved. So what do we do with this, right? What happens when you start to figure this out, that I've been redeemed, I'm being rescued? Well, you rejoice. That's what you do. You party. You rejoice in the Lord, right? You actually have some joy in your Christian life. There are so many Christians that are walking around sour and dour, and you want to just say to them, hey man, if you're happy and you know it, tell your face. You've been saved. Why you got to be so mean? Rejoice. Now today we're going to be reading from Psalm 107, and this is what we're going to be picking up. This is our message in a bottle today. Redemption results in rejoicing. Now we're going to have some different voices that are going to be reading our scripture today for us. And what I wanted you all to do is, while our readers are coming up, And we have a microphone there. And while our readers are coming up, what I want you guys to do is just focus on the words, focus on the rhythm of what's being said, and think about some of the parts of this passage that just speak to you and pop out for you. And we're going to be digging into it in just a moment.
Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His love endures forever.
Let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story, those he redeemed from the hand of the foe.
Those he gathered from the lands, from east and west, from north and south.
He led them by a straight way to a city where they could settle.
Let them give thanks to the Lord for his unfailing love and his wonderful deeds for humankind.
For he satisfies the thirsty and fills the hungry with good things.
Some sat in darkness, in utter darkness, prisoners suffering in iron chains.
Because they rebelled against God's commands and despised the plans of the Most High.
So he subjected them to bitter labor, and they stumbled, and there was no one to help.
Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he saved them from their distress.
He brought them out of the darkness, the utter darkness, and broke away their chains.
Let them give thanks to the Lord for his unfailing love and his wonderful deeds for humankind.
For he breaks down gates of bronze and cuts through bars of iron.
Some became fools through their rebellious ways and suffered affliction because of their iniquities.
They loathed all food and drew near the gates of death.
Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he saved them from their distress.
He sent out his word and healed them. He rescued them from the grave.
Let them give thanks to the Lord for his unfailing love and his wonderful deeds for humankind.
Let them sacrifice thank offerings and tell of his works with songs of joy.
Awesome. Such a beautiful psalm. And did you know that the reason why this psalm is part of the lectionary, which is a way of describing the passages of Scripture that are read on the Sundays that we're sort of experiencing during Lent, that the reason why this was part of the lectionary is in the historic church, this Sunday was known as Refreshment Sunday. So we served refreshments. So yeah, that's what we did. In the medieval time, it was a little bit different. They didn't have Shipley donuts and coffee, but they celebrated, right? Because it was smack dab in the middle of Lent. And in the Middle Ages, Lent was kind of a tough time for people as they're giving up meat, and there was not a lot of celebration. It's winter, it's muddy, there's all these things. And so they had this time of celebration in the middle of Lent when all of the texts spoke of rejoicing, spoke of what was to come, spoke of promises and resurrection. And so we're in the midst of that stream. We're part of that great history as we're experiencing the rejoicing, as we're experiencing this along with our sisters and brothers in all places and all times. Now, the theme of this particular psalm can be summed up in one word: chesed. Right? Can you say that word? Chesed. Right? You kind of have to have some phlegm going in the back of your throat. So if you don't want to do that and don't want to do something embarrassing, you could just say chesed, right? But chesed is a word that means the never-ending loving kindness and tender mercies and love of God. Love that never runs out. The chesed of God never fails. You hear that throughout the Psalms, right? The Lord's love never fails. His chesed never fails. That's the theme of this particular psalm that recalls in various parts of the psalm, some of the great moments in Israel's history where God rescued them. And so this is a way of looking back, so to speak, for the singer. And we didn't read the whole psalm, but if you go through that psalm, and I encourage you to do that, because some of what we're going to be talking about today is from passages that we didn't read, although most of it comes from the passage that we read today. But the singer is thinking about the history of Israel and the ways that Israel was rescued in moments, perhaps, where they were in trouble because of their own pride and their own willfulness and their own neglecting of the covenant with God. That even though they had done it to themselves, so to speak, and found themselves in a bad situation, there were all these points in their history where God had reached down and redeemed them. Not only did they know that God had chosen them from the beginning, right? That God had set them apart and set them aside. They were God's children. The children of Israel were the chosen ones, right? They knew that God had made that promise with them, but yet still they would go away from it, right? They would still find their own way in the world and get themselves into problems. And so God would then redeem them and rescue them. So God not only had chosen and redeemed them from the beginning, but continued to redeem them. And the singer is picking up on these and talking about them throughout the psalm. And here's what's fascinating. Even though the singer is looking back to Israel's history, the singer is also drawing each of us into the psalm as well, because each one of us finds ourselves in this psalm. The singer identifies four basic types of people that find themselves in bad situations, and each one of us has found ourselves in at least one or maybe more of those situations, and maybe some of us are struggling through them now. But what he does that's so beautiful in the way that he arranges the psalm is that even though he's going to be talking about those moments of darkness, those moments where people are struggling, he begins the whole psalm by starting off and saying, "Let the redeemed of the Lord say so." You are redeemed, he tells the people who are reading it. You are redeemed. You are rescued. You don't have to be afraid. Even though I'm going to be describing some of the situations where you might find yourself now, you are redeemed. You are rescued. This is great hope for us, right? As we read this passage and we find ourselves in the text. So what do we do with all this? How do we apply it to our lives? Well, the only way that we can really do it is by digging deeper and taking a look at those four types of people that we find in Psalm 107. The first type, and you find this in your notes, or if you're taking notes, is the people who wandered. He said, some wandered in one of the passages in the psalm. Some wandered. Now, he's talking specifically at this point about the people of Israel who wandered for 40 years in the desert before they made it to the promised land. But what is he saying to us? Well, there are many of us who find ourselves or who have found ourselves in a self-destructive wilderness of our own making. We hunger and we thirst, just like the people of Israel did when they had to depend fully on God to provide everything. We hunger and we thirst, and instead of looking to God to be our sustenance, instead of looking to God to help us find our way through the self-destructive place that we find ourselves in, we try to do it on our own. We try to find our own drink and our own food in ways that perhaps are not helpful by getting involved in habits and behaviors and relationships that lead us to destruction. And so if that's where you find yourself today, I want you to hear this. You are rescued. God has rescued you and will rescue you. God will reach out to you in the wilderness where you find yourself now. God will reach out to you. You don't have to hunger and thirst after the things of this world anymore because you have living water and the bread of life from Jesus himself. God is reaching out to you in that wilderness and is rescuing you. So rejoice. You have been found. The second person or second type of people that are found in this psalm that the singer lifts up are those who sat in darkness. He said, some sat in darkness. And he was referring to the people of Israel, the Hebrew people, when they were slaves and in bondage in Egypt for 400 years. But what is he speaking to us? Well, there are so many of us, right, that we find ourselves in this particular situation. We find ourselves in bondage, having chains around us, chains of guilt and shame of the mistakes that we have made and the bad choices that we have chosen and the tragic circumstances that surround us. And we are enslaved by this. We are surrounded, it seems, like a jail cell that we cannot get out. All the things that we have done and left undone haunt us. And if you find yourself in that situation today, where you are in chains from your past, then know this, that God has broken those chains. Those chains were there, held by your own strength. Let them go, and you will see them fall. God is reaching down to you in your darkness and calling you into his glorious light. Rejoice, because you have been set free. The third type of person that we see in the psalm are those who are sick with sin. Now, this refers to a time in Israel's life when they began to chase after other gods and other things other than Yahweh, when they felt abandoned by God, and so they decided to abandon God themselves, and they began to worship the gods that were around them. They began to put their trust in alliances with foreign countries. And they put their trust in weapons of war rather than their trust in the God of the angel armies. And so for us, those of us who find ourselves in this place, sitting in darkness, these are the people that have absolutely been overwhelmed by whatever it is that's closing in on you that has brought your darkness. Maybe it has been a bad relationship. Maybe it is addiction. Maybe it's alcohol. Maybe you have just made poor choices in your life in terms of your relationships, and you are feeling the pressure of that. Maybe it's your finances. Maybe it's a lack of a job. And so what happens is so many times when we're in the midst of this, we find ourselves consumed with the darkness of anger and resentment and bitterness. And God is saying to each and every one of us who finds ourselves in that place, don't loathe the good that's in the world. That's what many of us do, right? We loathe the good that is in the world, and we're numb to the joy that God would give to us. We become people that are unbearable to live with and can't even live with ourselves. And so God speaks to us in that moment and says, I will find you in that darkness. I will find you in that jail cell, because you're not defined by your past. You're not defined by what's been done to you. You're not defined by any of those things. You can step out of the darkness and into the light. You can be healed. Rejoice, because you have been made whole. And finally, the last group of people that we find in this psalm is when the psalmist says, some went down to the depths. And this refers directly to the Hebrew people who were taken away after the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem and destroyed the temple and took them into exile. Some went down to the depths. These are the people who have lost their courage, who are living in fear, living in dread of tomorrow, not sure what the future will bring, but so afraid of it that they remain immobilized in the present, unwilling or unable to step forward and to live into whatever God has in store for them because it seems too difficult for them to overcome. Living without peace. So if you find yourself in that situation today, I want to tell you that God is reaching out to you and redeeming you and rescuing you where you are, giving you hope and a future, as it says in Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 11, that that's what God has in store for you, that God wants for you to have the peace that passes understanding, as it says in the old King James Version of the Bible, which is kind of awesome sometimes to quote from, and probably the only one that I can really remember, because that's what I memorized when I was a kid. The peace that passes understanding. So what is that? It's when the peace that you have doesn't make any sense. The world is crashing in all around you, and you have peace, and somebody's saying, why do you have peace? And you're saying, I don't know. And it's because God has given you that peace. It's because when Jesus' feet hit the floor in that soon-to-be empty tomb, the game changed forever for all of us. and this hope and this resurrection and this new life, all of it is ours. Rejoice if you find yourself in that situation because you have been lifted up. Amen. Come on. I've gone all Baptirian on y'all today, haven't I? As the band comes up to sing 24 verses of Just As I Am. So rejoice. Rejoice. Because you're not condemned. You are not condemned. You are redeemed. You have been redeemed, and you are being redeemed. Salvation isn't just something that happened, it's something that is happening every single day of your life. The Apostle Paul wrote that we are nearer our salvation than we once were, to which I would say, duh, right? Because every day we wake up and we need redemption. And guess what? Every single day, God is reaching out to provide it, to rescue, to heal, to break chains, and to lift up. Because redemption results in rejoicing. Let's rejoice just a little bit, shall we?